Good evening. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be tonight's host. With us we have Will Michael, who's a Connecticut naturalist. He specializes in natural things out in nature. Could I say it a different way than that? Will, tell us about your background. And during the show, we're going to have a clip that Will took locally that is fascinating. We want you to watch that, and then we'll have a follow-up and learn a little bit about what the clip is about. First, tell us about yourself.
All right, well, thanks a lot for having me on tonight. And before we begin, yes, I'm Will Michael, and I produce a Comcast television show called Connecticut Naturalist. So most people think I am the Connecticut Naturalist, but it's more, the show is called Connecticut Naturalist. And back in 2003, I was a college student at Western Connecticut State University and had the idea that a lot of this, the diversity of wildlife that I had experienced growing up was unknown to a lot of our residents in the Fairfield County area. And Bethel, Danbury, Ridgefield, Reading, this whole area is one of the most environmentally diverse in the country. And unfortunately, we take for granted our own backyard habitat. And so the goal of Connecticut Naturalist is to help educate kids, children, their parents, the community about the diversity of wildlife found right here in our own backyard. We're not talking about the Amazon jungle. We've got it all right outside our door.
Well, trust me, what we're going to see is way better than television, but don't turn the television off and run out now. Wait till tomorrow. But describe a little bit about what we're going to see in the clip, because a lot of things are going to be not exactly as they seem.
Right. Well, again, the first topic that really excited me as a environmental advocate was the topic of amphibians, frogs, toads, and salamanders. And in this area, during the spring breeding season, there's a wealth of amphibian activity when all the frogs, toads, salamanders migrate to vernal pools to breed and lay their eggs.
Vernal meaning springtime.
Yes.
Now, a lot of us are ourselves hibernating through the springtime, and we don't really come to life maybe until the baseball season starts. But there's a lot that's going on during that time frame in nature that we could certainly take part in watching without causing any damage to any creatures. We can have some reasonable ways of getting out there and viewing these things. Expound on that.
Well, a lot of times viewers will ask me, where do you go for these shots? How do you get these shots of, well, we'll take a look in a few minutes. But the main thing in nature is to simply just be aware and observant. And there's so much to be said about awareness perception, where many times I'll be on a hike or leading a hike. And for instance, yesterday I was walking past a patch of milkweed. Mm-hmm. Now normally you're on a hike and you might not stop and look at the milkweed. But if you do, stop, know what habitats you're in, know what the surroundings are, and focus your attention on any habitat, whether it's a vernal pool, whether it's a patch of milkweed. You can discover a whole world, a whole microcosm on one plant or in one pool. So the milkweed was harboring all types of caterpillars that feed on the milkweed. The vernal pool harbors a whole other set of life, amphibians, insects, and then all the animals that come in to feed on the food chain.
Now the milkweed, that's the thing with a kind of a pod that's about the size of your hand, two hands put together, and then it breaks open and it has all this cottony kind of stuff inside?
Yes. The pods, sometimes they grow together, so it looks about the size of your hand, but the actual pods are maybe about 2 fingers.
Two fingers.
Sometimes they're grouped together like this. as far as vernal pools in the springtime, a non-obtrusive way to observe the intricate behavior of the amphibians is simply to listen, and we're all familiar with those peeps that we hear when we're driving home from work or on the way to school.
Peepers, yeah.
Spring peepers. And if you pull your car over, get out, listen to the peeps, head in that direction, and simply watch, bring a flashlight, you can be exposed to this whole world that's going on. And often the spring peepers are an indicator species that other animals will be there, such as yellow-spotted salamanders, Jefferson salamanders, red-spotted newts. The list goes on and on.
So an indicator is something that, does it clue other animals into coming onto the scene, or does it just clue the observant listener onto what's going on at the same time?
The observant listener, because the peepers frequent habitats that are used by salamanders and insects that don't make any sound. So if you hear the peepers, they're giving off this alarm call, their breeding song, and as a human you can hear that and say, okay, let's check out this habitat.
So rather than being fearful of what's going on out in the woods, if you trust your intuitive sense about nature generally being non-harmful to human beings, and just follow your ears, you say, follow it out into the woods and locate. You can just follow it and pretty much zero in on where the peepers are, and just look and listen and observe and learn.
It's all about looking, listening, observing, and I have my camera with me, so as I'm doing this, I'm documenting everything. And one thing that I try to make a point of on the show is that, again, this is through the eye of the camera. It's documenting what's happening out there, and we're not capturing any animals, because I'm all about leaving them to do their own thing, observing, and that's it. So if you'd like, we can air that clip in a few seconds or so, so the viewers can have a sense of what we're discussing, and then we can fill them in on what they've just seen, and if you have any questions.
Is there a lot of editing that goes into, or you just basically take the camera out and go right in and get your shot? Is there a lot of time consumed by what you do?
Well, there's a lot of time, because unlike a person, you can't write a script for an animal. You have to time it right. You have to be there when it's there. There's no guarantee that it will be there. And then the situations in which we're filming, underwater, nocturnal, the lighting, the animals move away. So it takes hours and hours of field work to narrow down a 6-minute video sample.
So now, but without the camera, without that obtrusive camera that you have to inject into the situation to watch, to actually get the footage, someone going out of the woods, would they have an easier time than having to spend a lot of time to observe? Would they have a better chance of seeing a lot within a short period of time?
Yes. Observing, you can see a lot in a short period of time. To document it properly, that's what takes time.
Yeah.
Welcome back, everyone. On one night of the year, thousands of yellow-spotted and Jefferson salamanders migrate to vernal pools to breed. But that's just the beginning of the story. And now for the second act, the battle for the eggs. On one night of the year, thousands of yellow-spotted and Jefferson salamanders migrate to vernal pools to breed. We're here tonight to capture some of this rare activity on film. As the night wears on, the females begin to lay their eggs. They attach their eggs to underwater twigs and branches. The eggs are encased in a jelly-like coating that swells with water, forming a protective barrier around the embryos. In approximately 10 to 14 days, the larva will hatch, but these are perilous times. Predators lurk everywhere, and they all view the eggs as the same thing, a free meal. Red-spotted newts are the biggest threat. They patiently hover around the eggs and work all night to rip through the jelly. The newts only inhabit pools that keep water during the entire year. Although most pools used by the salamanders dry up, some perpetually retain their water. In case you're wondering, a newt is a category of salamander that spends its adolescence on land, returning to water at maturity. In the case of the red-spotted newt, it begins life as the red-eft, shown here, transforming and changing color as it matures. Newts live an opposite life cycle of the yellow-spotteds and Jeffersons that reside in water as juveniles and live on land as adults. This strange-looking insect is a caddisfly larva. It has the same idea as the newts: eat while the eating's good. This insect builds a camouflage shell around its body from leaves it collects on the pond floor. It will transform into a flying adult upon maturity. The jelly surrounding the eggs is a good defense, but persistence pays off. With much effort, the caddisfly finally bores through the jelly and devours the egg inside. In this picture, we can actually see its head inside the hollow egg chamber.
One of the hardest parts about being out here is that every time I take a step, all this mud gets churned up, but also all this activity, this disturbance, the leeches can feel my vibrations. So here's one right now coming at me. Good thing I've got my waders on.
We're all aware that leeches usually feed on the blood of other animals, but they too cannot resist the opportunity for a free meal. Notice the bright orange underbelly. When swimming, they have a fluid motion, and as I film, they're attracted towards the vibrations that I make in the water. Animals like leeches that feed on blood are called sanguivores. As we observe all this activity, we now realize this pool is like a whole universe within itself. Millions of tiny invertebrates are attracted to our lights and swim across the camera lens. More food for the red-spotted newts. Water boatmen dart rapidly about. They too are breeding at this time of year. Notice the paddle-like appendages they use to propel through the water. Even our egg eaters must be on guard. A giant water beetle lurks nearby. The beetle will eat anything it can get its claws on, even a red-spotted newt. A fast and powerful swimmer, they can also fly in the air from one water body to another. These large beetles are camouflage and blend well with the leaves on the pool's bottom, making them difficult for us to find and a deadly predator for anything that swims by. Much to my surprise, tonight's warm temperature has awakened a toad. It's out a little earlier than usual, but it proves that you never know what you might find out here. Swimming on the water's surface, it looks like he's moving through outer space.
Here on Connecticut Naturalist Television, we always encourage young people to take an active role in the environment. Here's a behind-the-scenes look.
Now, as you noted, this to our audience, this was all shot at night. So this is the kind of stuff that you're probably not going to see much of unless you want to get out there at nighttime with a flashlight and observe. But does this continue on into the daytime, or is it strictly nocturnal?
This continues into the daylight. The only thing that's strictly nocturnal is the female yellow-spotted and Jefferson salamanders actually laying the eggs.
Okay.
The red-spotted newts, the caddisfly larva, the water boatman, the other insects that were just seen,
What
they're
about
active in
that's
the
the one
daylight.
with the one looks like a sort of like a cockroach a little bit,
Yes, it has these appendages. That
but it's got the shiny black back, which looks like it might turn into wings.
that one was a water beetle.
Water beetle, okay.
It's predaceous.
Which
And
means
that will feed on anything.
Okay.
The newts, the spotted salamander larva, other insects. So that insect is at the top of the food chain. Ironically, we think of insects as being at the bottom, but in that world right there, that macroscopic world,
That's the one that's at the top
one
of the food chain.
the top. And again, in the daylight, the eggs are visible, so you could go up and observe what's happening. But those yellow-spotted and Jefferson salamanders only come up to the water between 1, 2, 3 days, 3 nights out of the entire year. So it's an extremely time-sensitive event that most people don't get to see.
What would one reasonably expect to see going in the daytime? Would they ever watch any of the eggs hatch?
Yes, you can see the eggs hatch. After those eggs are laid, depending on the temperature, the development of the embryos is driven or accelerated by warmer temperatures.
Okay.
So in approximately 10 to 21 days, the eggs will develop into the larva,
Develop and hatch.
and they'll exit that jelly-like
Yeah,
coating, the
yeah.
ones that survive. And then they have to avoid all of the other, they have to avoid the predators while they're swimming around, in addition to hoping they don't get eaten while they're immobile.
So their chances of success, of survival, if you will, are very slim. Almost like, I'm sure a lot of our audience members have seen things like turtle eggs hatching on the beach.
Exactly.
And then the turtles have to make it out to deep water and past just an incredible array of predators that are there, knowing that those turtles are there. They'll be
Yes.
going through the water to the deep ocean, and they're just, they're ready to eat as many as they can. And now, how does nature allow for individuals within the species? What gives them a chance to survive over other ones?
Right. Well, in the case of amphibians, the survival of the fittest strategy, the reproduction, there's survival in numbers. So the strategy of the amphibian is to lay as many eggs as possible, and out of sheer odds, out of 1,000 eggs, out of thousands of eggs, some will survive, opposed to mammals that have one offspring,
Which most often survives.
yes, and carry internally. So the amphibians, such as these salamanders, aren't probably thinking about what's going on. It's just there's enough of our embryos here and eggs that some will survive, just based on the massive amounts that exist.
So in order for one female salamander, to carry on for another generation, she will be the one which lays the most eggs, probably. And her
Yes.
and her genetics, her DNA will be passed on by dint of her laying more eggs than another salamander.
Yes, so again, if she only laid one egg, you saw all those insects feeding on those eggs, that one would be devoured. If she lays 50 and the other one lays 50 and one lays 60, the chances are much higher of survival.
Is there any interaction between parent and child, or is it just parent lays eggs, and where does the parent go then?
After the females lay their eggs, they retreat to the surrounding earth. So they're terrestrial. They only live in water to lay their eggs.
Then they're
these
out under. Then
salamanders.
they live in. Where do they live? Along the ground? Do they climb into trees? Where do they live?
The interesting thing about the salamanders we just saw, and in relation to Terre Haute and the Ives Trail, is that these are highland habitats. A stereotype is frogs and salamanders live in a dank, murky swamp, but that's false.
Not true,
They
huh?
prefer clear water with no fish. Fish have to be absent.
Yeah, because the fish would probably be
Exactly.
be predators that would take care of all of them.
And so a situation like this, after they lay their eggs, they retreat into the surrounding glacial rock deposits left over from the last ice age. So you see these little soft-bodied salamanders, and you look around surrounding the vernal pool and saw these massive boulders and those little
Tiny
amphibians.
spaces. And they find those
swirl in.
spaces and they hang out there.
Yes.
What do they eat while they're alive? How long do they live and what do they eat?
Well, in captivity, I think the record for the salamanders here, the spotteds and the Jefferson, is around 7 years.
Okay.
Now, in the wild, that could probably be their maximum, 7 or 8 years.
Is there any way to know, really? Does anybody study them enough in the
Well,
wild to get a sense of how long they're likely to live?
The Connecticut Amphibian Monitoring Project has a lot of data and research going on, counting amphibians, monitoring them, and they have some statistics where they're able to get an idea of how long these salamanders are living.
Get a sense of their longevity in the wild.
Yes. And they eat underground invertebrates and insects, from worms to ants to crickets. They're predators. So there's an abundant food supply in this subterranean habitat.
Does that help keep the insect population down that we encounter?
Well, most people complain about mosquitoes and ticks.
Yeah. Not on their diet?
Ticks, no, but mosquito larvae, before they're mosquitoes, they also live in the water.
Good.
So
Yeah.
all those eggs, when they hatch into salamanders,
They're out taking care of the
larva,
mosquitoes,
the larva salamanders could eat the larva mosquitoes,
which reduces their population, which benefits people.
hopefully.
Well, people that don't like mosquitoes, let's say.
Right.
And of course, birds and other animals also have an important part to play in keeping the mosquito population down. But it's interesting to find out that that salamanders do also.
Yes, I mean, not to the extent of bats or
Yeah.
frogs or spiders and spider webs, but in that underwater time period, certainly to a degree.
Well, they probably actually inhibit the number that are there for birds and bats and spiders and whatnot, probably to their detriment, but in the long run, probably to the benefit of nature, because it would seem that if they didn't do the job early on, it would be very hard for birds and bats and spiders to take care of as a big a population as there would be otherwise.
Yes. Again, if you think there's a lot of salamander eggs, the number of mosquito larvae is just, it dwarfs that.
I can imagine.
But those salamanders, all the insects, they were eating the embryos. Once the embryo is large enough, then that turns into the predator. So then it's going to eat the same insects that were originally feeding upon the smaller version of the salamander.
Now, next spring rolls around. When should people who want to learn a little bit more about this and actually see nature in motion, when should they start finding their way into the woods, and what would they expect to see March, April, May,
all of this activity starts towards the end of March.
End of March.
And if they want to contact me with any questions or even join me on one of my excursions, my website is ctnaturalist.org.
And it's a beautiful website. I've seen it. It's fantastic. Well worth a visit. And there you can go from there if you want to learn more. You can contact Will and arrange for a trip out into these Tarry Weil and
Yes.
and to learn more. So there's limitless things to be learned about this.
And all of the footage not only is aired on Comcast, but it's also available on the web now. So if you missed the show,
Yeah.
or if you want to show your kids, you can go on the website, click on the videos, and have access to all of the... I'm creating a database of backyard wildlife in Fairfield County
Oh,
to
okay.
hopefully be used by parents, students, teachers, anybody that's enthused about the environment.
So either remember Connecticut Naturalist, ctnaturalist.org, or what would they likely Google to find it if they've forgotten the name of the site?
They could Google CT Naturalist or Connecticut Naturalist.
Either way, it'll narrow
Yeah.
your Google search down.
Probably Connecticut would be, that's more specific.
What else would you like to discuss?
Well, I don't know, we're probably running out of time.
We're down to about a minute now. So.
But again, I'd like to thank you for having me on the show, and for the audience to keep in mind, all of these animals that are, let me start over, all the creatures we just looked at are very small, and you don't have to go and look at an elephant to see interesting wildlife. Some of the most amazing things you'll ever see exist among the tiniest of creatures.
Perhaps the most complex, perhaps the
And-
tinier, the more complex.
And the salamanders range from 8 inches down to about 2.5 inches. And
So
then
about
the insects
the length of an
are even
adult's finger.
smaller. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to wrap it up there. This is Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson. We've had Will Michael on talking about Tarry Weil Park, which everybody knows the name Tarry Weil Park. There's a lot to be seen out there.
Terre Haute.
Terre Haute Park. Thank you. Terre Haute Park. Is that part of the Tarry Weil?
Well, they're all connected.
They're all connected, but Terre Haute is actually the one.
Yeah.
Okay.